Now that I have wrapped up my fan mock drafts, I want to take a look back on how fan opinions have changed over the offseason so far. Like I stated in the first mock draft, I wanted to run this experiment to see how fans view each prospect throughout the offseason. The first mock draft was a baseline of fan opinions right as the season ended. So in this video, I'm going to review how every prospect in that first mock is viewed now in my most recent mock after free agency. But before I get into all that, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to this channel. I'm trying to grow this channel, so any little bit helps. Anyway, onto the video. So I'm going to organize this video into 3 parts. In the first part, I'll look back on the first 10 picks. Then in the second part, I'll look at picks 11 through 21. And the last part, I will look at the remaining picks. So why don't we start with the first 10 picks? Here are the top 10 draft selections in my last 3 mock drafts. The major change from the first mock was that 2 QBs went in the top 3. This had a ripple effect on the rest of the top 10. This of course affected where Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter go. Both went in the top 4 since they are viewed as the best players, but which teams they went to depended on who went first. I think either the Browns or Giants will take one of them, and the Patriots will have their pick on who is left, since I think 2 QBs will go in the top 3. If for whatever reason, either Hunter or Carter manages to get past the Patriots, there is no possibility they get past the Jaguars at 5. Speaking of the Jaguars, they went with a Michigan player each time. In the first mock, they didn't have Mason Graham available, so they went with his teammate in Will Johnson. But since they had Mason Graham available in the next 2 mocks, they decided to go with him. This is basically what every mock draft has them doing, unless they were either trading down or either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter made their way to them. What I find interesting is that Will Johnson never made it past 6. Raiders fans seem really high on him, and not as high on Ashton Jeanty. Jeanty is a common pick to the Raiders in many mocks that I see, and he feels a need for them as well. But Raiders fans weren't particularly close to selecting him. It was pretty heavily Will Johnson in mock 2.0, but in 3.0, a lot more names were put out. Jeanty was a stronger contender in 3.0, but McMillan and Will Campbell were either just as strong or even stronger. However, Will Johnson still won pretty easily in both 2.0 and 3.0. Tedero and McMillan went to the Jets in both 1.0 and 2.0, but slipped a spot thanks to Membu's stock shooting up after the combine. The Panthers were a pretty strong contender for McMillan, and the moment he was available for them, they pounced on the opportunity. But with what's been coming out about McMillan, and people not viewing him as highly anymore, closer to draft day, I wouldn't be surprised to see McMillan completely out of the top 10. For the rest of the top 10, there were some pretty big switch-ups in 3.0. The Saints went with an edge player despite going Will Campbell in the first 2 mocks. And the Bears draft Jeanty after going offensive line in the first 2 mocks as well. I think Tyler Booker was a massive reach in 1.0, but going offensive line for the Bears made sense. But after free agency, their need for offensive line went down pretty significantly. But the Saints didn't have the same change. They didn't really bring in any new starters on the offensive line in free agency, and the drop-off in linemen is pretty significant in the second round. But you could also say the same for edge players. But personally, I'm not really a big fan of any of the top edge players in this class outside of Abdul Carter and James Pierce, who is notably not in any of the top 10s in 2.0 or 3.0. I would personally prefer Will Campbell over any of the edge players if I were the Saints. Now we get into the parts of the draft with the most variance. But there were some consistent teams in this range. The Cowboys would have probably went with Ashton Jeanty a 3rd time if he was available. The Colts went Tyler Warren every time he was available. The Falcons went with an edge player every single time. The Cardinals went with a defensive tackle every time. Seahawks fans really want to address their offensive line. And Buccaneers fans fell in love with Donovan Azaraku. Though there is one trend break that I found really interesting. The Dolphins, despite going for Kelvin Banks in the first 2 mock drafts, decided to switch it up and go with Jahad Campbell in the 3rd one. Now I like Jahad Campbell, and I think he is the best off-the-ball linebacker in this draft. But when you have a quarterback who needs some serious protection, I'm not sure a linebacker is the best move when Kelvin Banks is still available. I would also like to note the Bengals. Though they didn't go for the same position each time, they did stay consistent and went with the best defensive player each time. And boy, do they need defense. Now I want to look at some of the player movement in this range. There was a lot. Benjamin Morrison, spoiler, literally was never picked in the first round again. Luther Burden also hit his high point in 1.0. Tyler Booker's draft spot went down in every mock. Emeka Egbuka falls out of this range in 2.0 and 3.0, though no one's fall was as severe as Mike Green. After the Super Bowl, he was seen as a possible top 15 player. But just before the combine, a pretty serious report came out and his stock has fallen a lot since. He was not selected in the first round of any of my mock drafts since. I could see him being drafted in the first round again if during his interviews he better explains the situation or the report is proven false. But I don't think fans would think highly of the pick. It's a massive risk. But there were a good amount of risers in this range. One of the biggest risers was Armand Bembou. He went from being seen as a mid-first round pick to a top 10 pick, in part thanks to his combine performance. Jahdae Barron has been rising up draft boards for a while now. During the NFL season, he was seen as a second round pick, but he's seen a steady rise over the offseason as people see his utility as very valuable. And similar players to him, like Brian Branch, having a lot of success in the NFL. He's personally one of my favorite corner prospects in this draft. I also mentioned Jihad Campbell earlier, but he's probably my favorite linebacker in this class. Not sure teams will value him as much as fans, but I think he will go somewhere in the late teens or early 20s. A few other risers of note are Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, Nick Emenwari, and Derek Harmon. But one I want to focus on is Donovan Ezeraku. He's similar to Mike Green in that he's a pass rush technician who is undersized, but I think he's being overhyped right now. There is a lot to like about him. For his size, he has surprisingly good length. This allows him to be a pretty good run defender despite his size. He has very good pass rushing technique, and it shows in his college production. It wasn't like he was going up against weak competition either. He went against some pretty solid teams. But of course, the main reason I have concerns about him is that he is seriously undersized for an edge. In the NFL, he can easily get shut down against larger tackles. I'm not saying he won't have success, but I would seriously temper expectations for him. If you expect him to be a guy who can be an edge one for a team and consistently put up double-digit sack seasons in the NFL, you will be disappointed. Now we get into the last few picks of the first round. For it being the late first round, there was a surprising amount of consistency. The Chargers literally picked the same player in every mock. After Matthew Golden's stock went up after the combine, he's constantly gone to the Packers. The Rams went after a perfect fit in Emeka Egbuka in every draft he was available. The Ravens got the best edge player available in every mock. Same with the Lions as well. The Chiefs went offensive tackle each time, and the Eagles went after Nick Scorton when Derek Harmon wasn't available. Understandable since Harmon's stock has been steadily going up over the course of the offseason. But I'd say every team in this range was pretty consistent. Really, the only deviations occurred when a good player was available, like Derek Harmon, Malachi Starks, or Luther Burden. Though in Burden's case, his stock has been falling a lot. He wasn't even selected in 3.0. Speaking of players that have been falling, many of them ended up here. Malachi Starks briefly fell into this range, but his stock seems to have gone back up slightly. Emeka Egbuka fell into this range, but I think he's a perfect fit with the Rams, so I'm not sure he gets past them. Tyler Booker has fallen a bit, but I think he was being overdrafted to begin with anyway. Kelvin Banks made it to the Texans in 3.0 for some reason. He would be a huge steal if he fell that far on draft day. But I think some notable players in this range are the pass rushers. James Pierce took a big fall after being selected in the top 10 of 1.0. But thanks to a report of some behavior issues, he fell into this range. If the Ravens were able to snag him here, he would be a huge steal because he has top 10 talent in my opinion. The other pass rusher I want to note is Shamar Stewart. Fans do not view him highly at all. His lack of college production is a non-starter for many fans. It's why he's available so late despite his stock going up after the combine. I think he's selected in the top 15 and won't be available in this range. There are a few other players I want to look at here, but these are players who were selected in 1.0 and then never selected again. I'm going to start with Ariante Ursary. He was overdrafted in 1.0. There's nothing all that remarkable about him that would put him in the first round. He has good size, okay length, but pretty good speed. but straight line speed doesn't matter for an offensive tackle. He lacks the fluidity you would need for an offensive tackle. He's really just a solid day 2 tackle and may have been overhyped by his good Senior Bowl performance. And the other player that just wasn't drafted again was Siobhan Revel. I actually think Revel is a good corner. Just he had an ACL injury last year which really hurt his draft stock. But with some other corners having some good combines, he falls to the wayside a bit. But there were a few players that had their stocks rise over the course of the offseason so far. Like I noted earlier, Matthew Golden is a big one. He had a very good combine and is now in wide receiver 1 talks. Another guy who had a very good combine was Nick Emenwari. I briefly mentioned him earlier, but I'll talk more about him now. Emenwari was considered a second-round prospect that could maybe find himself in the first round. But after his impressive combine performance and measurables, he solidified himself as a first-round guy. How could you not want a guy who is the size of a linebacker that runs a 4.3? Also, for some reason Josh Simmons was just not selected in 1.0. I get he has an injury, but with someone of his talent, you would have thought a fan base would be interested in him. But he was selected late in 2.0 and 3.0. If his injury checks out on his pro day, I would expect him to go somewhere in the top 20. Trey Amos has also seen a slight rise as of late. I was actually surprised to see him selected in 3.0. He's one of my favorite day 2 corners, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him sneak into the late first. Lastly, Nick Scorton. I think he's a solid fit for the Eagles. He just wasn't selected in 1.0 because Harmon was there. But that's my last 3 fan mock drafts. I might do one more before the draft, but only if my 3.0 video hits 100 likes. If you guys want to see me make one more, go watch that video after this one and leave a like on it. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.